Hey everybody, so for this week's program we're going to work on will be the classical Tic Tac Toe game. So basically we have the following setup. We have these buttons and they're currently set to blank, and we're going to click on a button which will activate a turn. So right now it's player X's turn, so I'm going to click over here on the button, and it's going to, of course, add the X over there, and it changed it from to player X's to player O's turn. If I click again on this button, it's actually not going to change the turn because there's already an X over there. It only works on buttons that have no text on them. And then, of course, I'll just keep playing this game. So I'm going to put a 0 there, and I'll just place X over here, O over there. I'm going to have X win, so I click over there. What will happen then is all of these buttons will be disabled, and we want to, so we see here we have a win in the situation. So I'm going to, so there's no way to actually restart the game here on the app, but of course you can add functionality to this. Perhaps a button that will reset the game, but I didn't really do that, so I'm going to just refresh the companion screen, just so I can try another example of this. But basically, all we're doing is just, we have to sort of allow the user to make a move. And then if either you have 3 in a row in a horizontal direction or diagonal, so if you have 3 in a row of X's or O's in this direction, this or this, it's a win, or this direction or in that diagonal. Now let's go ahead and try to have a case where nobody wins. We have a draw. So I'm going to so I'm going to try to play this so as a draw ends up happening. So I'll just have a 0 over there. I'm going to keep on blocking X every time. So X will block O. O will block X over there as well. I guess maybe X will try here. I guess O will try that. X will block it. And we see here we have a tie. So we're going to basically implement this game. So let's go ahead and go into the details as to how we're going to implement or write the code to create this game. So a change up from for this week compared to last few weeks of App Inventor is this time I'm not going to go over how to create the look step by step and have you follow it, but rather I'm going to actually give you sort of a template where you can use, and it's going to have the look already constructed. And of course, feel free to modify it or even create your own look from scratch if you want. But just to save time in lab, I'm going to give you guys sort of a file. So I'm going to try to email this to everybody. I believe I do have everybody's email address. I will email this file to everybody. But if, let's say, for some reason there's somebody not in our email listing, I will bring a flash drive and hopefully ask my TAs so they can also bring some flash drives, and we can go to your computer at your terminal in the lab and just save that file to your desktop there, and then upload or be able to copy it to your MIT App Inventor project. So that way everybody will have the view created. So I'm going to do the following. So right now, if I go to my downloads folder, I have this file here called Tic Tac Toe Template.aia. That's going to be the file we can use to import to your MIT App Inventor. So we have to import this into one of our apps. So I'm going to go to Projects. Instead of saying Start New Project, I'm going to import project from my computer. I'm going to click on this. It'll give me this sort of pop-up window. I'm going to click on Choose File. And right now it happened to luckily open up my downloads folder. Of course, if this file was located somewhere else, you'd have to navigate to that file, but this one is saved in my downloads folder. I will click on that file and then hit open and then hit OK. Now, for me, I already have a file called Tic Tac Toe Template because I use this project to export to this AIA file. But for you, it would just go ahead and just use Tic Tac Toe Template. It would just not have this 2 there, it would not have this conflict. But for me, it does. But for you, that would just should automatically create the project automatically for you, just like that. So I'll hit OK. And there's our project. So I didn't have to actually add anything. I gave you guys all this stuff. So here we have our label up top called LBL message, and each button is labeled accordingly. So I have btn r1c1, sorry, r1c1 here. This one's r1c2, r1c3. So for row 1, column 3, so row 1, column 1, row 2, row 1, column 2, sorry, row 1, column 3. That's going to be row 2, column 1, row 2, column 2, row 2, column 3, row 3, column 1, row 3, column 2, and row 3, column 3. So we're going to be given this set, and of course you can modify. So I use a table arrangement to be able to set these up. So I have 3 columns and 3 rows. So I add these buttons in there accordingly. But of course, feel free to mess with this if you want to make it look a little nicer. I didn't really use all kinds of fancy colors for, let's say I want to have the X and the O's have maybe X could be red and O's could be blue text. Of course, you can do that as well, but I wasn't really too creative because I'm not the best at designing the look. So that's how we get our project. So we have it already, we had the view already set for us. We don't have to worry about that. Now we have to go ahead and worry about the blocks. All right, so let's go ahead and get started on the blocks. So I'm going to click on the blocks section right here, and then right back to our original block situation. So the first thing I'll do is this part. I guess you can follow along with me, and of course I'll go over this in our lab on Saturday. So basically the first thing I'm going to do is have a variable. This variable is going to just tell me which turn is it. Is it going to be player O's turn or player X's turn? So I'm going to create a variable, and I'm going to initialize a variable. I'm going to call it turn. And initially, I'm going to go ahead and set it to true. So this is going to be known as a Boolean variable. So turn holds the value true or false is what's going to be the case. So true, if turn contains true, that means we're going to say that, okay, it's X player's turn. If turn contains false, then we'll say it's player O's turn, or vice versa, because really it's either X or O's turn, so we can assign true to X, and then false to O, or we can assign true to O and false to X. So anyway, so now we have that part done. Okay, so each of these buttons will have their own click event, right? So we have 9 total buttons. So okay, what I could do is go to my btn r1c1 and then click and then grab one for this one, and so forth, right? So what I want to do is I go back to my designer, is if the text contained over there is blank, then I want to set it to X or O. So I'm going to first do this approach, but I'm going to do a different method in a second, because this method is not exactly the best way, because we don't want to have a lot of events going on, because each button really does behave the same. But let's go ahead and just for right now, let's just go over how to set these buttons. So I'm going to right now have the following setup. I'm going to have my btn1, and we can actually set the text of the actual button. So what I'll do right now is the following. So here's sort of another version of our control. So we have these very basic if then, but we have these kind of if thens, which have these little extra sorts of, this has this extra clip, I guess, that can connect to this. So we want to set the text to something based on some condition. So I'm going to do the following. I'm going to say variable get global turn. So if turn contains true, then if global turn. Now, of course, we could actually do the following. So I'll do this method as well. We could compare if this Boolean equals true. We could do that. This way is not really it's not so common in programming, because comparing a Boolean to a true or false is a bit redundant. So really this method would work. So you can of course use this if you want, but I'm going to not use it. I'm going to go ahead and just do this. That's the same thing as if I were to have done this. These two are the same. Except really for Boolean variables, there's no point to compare it because its global turn either contains true or false. So if turn contains true, so if true, then it will do this then portion. So I'm going to leave this out, but of course you could use that if that's more comfortable to you. Maybe if we're newer to programming, this might be easier. So I want to set the text either to X or O based on what this is. So if global turn contains true, okay, I'm going to set the text to have the character X. Else, I'm going to set this text box, or the text field for this btn r1 c1 to be O. Now, of course, I only want to do this only if this r1 c1 button is actually blank. So I'm going to go ahead and do the following. I'm going to say another if statement over here. So I'm going to say if btn, let's see here, let's grab the text field, let's grab that, and I'm going to grab this text and click on this is empty. So if R1C1's text is empty, then I want to go ahead and do this. I want to set that text to be X or O based on what's stored in this turn variable. So now let's go ahead. I'm just going to right click and duplicate this entire block and modify this part to be R1C2, R1C2, and duplicate this one more time. So I do it for the first three buttons. It's going to be R1C3 over here and R1C3 over there. So there we are. So let's go ahead and just first run this and see what happens. So I'm going to, I think it should already connect to this. I think it should already automatically update this on the emulator. Let's see if it does. So it does. It adds X to each one of these. If I click again on this, it's not going to do anything. So one issue is that, well, after every time we click X, and it's not going to alternate between X's and O's, because the problem is this turn variable is set to true, and there's nothing here that's going to actually modify it and sort of swap these. So I'm going to go ahead right now, back to my blocks over here, and I'm going to grab a variable. I'm going to set the turn variable, grab this logic, this not block, and then my variable get turn. So what does this do? Well, I want to set my turn variable to not turn. So not is a way to sort of flip this true to a false or false to a true. So I have global turn. If it contains true, then not true will make it false. So if turn contains true, then not of this will make it false. And I'm going to assign false to this. If let's say if the turn contained false, then not of that will make it true. So not just flips from true to false and false to true. I'm going to reassign turn to that. So it's going to basically set sort of the, it's going to swap the true and false after the move. I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to only do this only if it's not empty. So I don't want to really swap it if it's not empty, because there's no turn to be done there. So turn only happens if it's not empty, this button's text field. Then we can actually make a move, and only then do we want to actually swap this. Let's go ahead and refresh the emulator so I can get a brand new screen. Let's see if this actually does. So it's going to take about a second, I guess, to reload this. I think the max version of the emulator is faster. But anyway, here we go. So it's first X's turn. Okay, so I click there. And now it should be, now it doesn't output this. I don't actually have my code sort of output to this label. So of course you have to also output to the label after you set the buttons to X or O, but that's something we can work on later. If I click over here, not outputs O, because what happened was it swapped this Boolean at the very end. So now, when I ran this, global turn was actually false, so if false, which means this was not valid, so the else case happened. So now afterwards, it set it back to true. So I click over here. Now global turn is going to be true in this situation, so it's true. So it's going to output an X into our BTN R1 C3 box. So okay, so far we have this working. Of course, I'm not going to write this here, I'm not going to put this block here, but of course you could also output to this label. After you make your turn, maybe you can output to the label whose turn it is. So of course we have this LBL message, so you go ahead and use the set sort of set LBL message.text to something new after we sort of run this block right there. But I'm not going to put that for right now. You can sort of worry about that later on when you're working on the lab. So now I'm going to introduce a different way of doing this, because right now, okay, of course we could have 9 different events, but that's not the most efficient way. So we're going to go over how to create procedures and also have it where we can have one block that handles every possible click event. So let's go ahead and get started on that. Okay, so let's go ahead and sort of take these blocks and just remove all of these. So I'm going to go ahead and start over again, because really having 9 different of these is going to be kind of silly, because really each sort of block is relatively similar to each other. So what I'm going to do right now, in fact, is I'm going to actually go down to my blocks and go over here to this any component, which is, we haven't covered this yet, but let's cover it now. I'm going to click on any component. And now we have the following. So we have any button. So this is going to we're going to create a block that's going to occur if any button is going to get clicked. So let's go out over here, and when any button dot click. So what this is going to do is now it's going to allow us to, well, let's see, it's going to basically, this block will run when any button on our on our view gets clicked. So what I'm going to do right now is do what I did a second ago. I want to actually set the button's text to be X or O based on what the turn is and which button was clicked. So I'm going to have to first create our if statement again. So remember, we want to have an if statement over here that checks if the button is empty. So what I'm going to do right now is go over here to any button, and I'm going to click on, let's see, one of these. Let me see, which one is it? Button text. So we want to check that button's text. We don't know which button was clicked. We want to see whatever button was clicked. We want to see what the text of that button is containing. So we have to assign it, well, which component which button are we looking at here? So I have to click on component, get component, and drop is there. So basically, whatever button, whatever component call this function, we want to go ahead and look at that button's text. So we're going to check that button's text. And I want to see if that button text is empty, of course. Remember, we want to know if it's an empty button, or the text field, sorry, for that button is empty. So I'm going to go ahead and use is empty, like that. So now what's going to happen is that we're going to check and see if that's empty, like that. So if the button that was clicked, whichever button it was, if that button is empty, the text field, well, then I want to go ahead and set that button to an X or an O for that text. So I'm going to go back down over here to any button once again, and let's do a set block. So let's do a set text. There it is. So I want to set the text of this button. So the component will be, well, whichever button called a function. So this get component, so get component will be just some button on our view. I want to set that button's text to be, well, once again, either X or O based on whether it's true or false for our turn variable. So I'm going to now go ahead and let's see. Look at this if statement over here. Yep. So you have to go over here to our if. Perfect. So we're going to set this to, well, x or o based on whatever is stored in our variable, in our Boolean turn variable. So I'm going to get this turn, and if the turn is true, then I want to set the text to be x. Else, I want to set this text to be o. And of course, I'm going to also modify this turn variable to something else. I'm going to actually grab this variable field. I get a set block, a get block, set global turn, not like that. So this is going to, again, just going to flip this from true to false accordingly. But now this one sort of block will work for every single button on our view. Instead of having to create 9 different clicks, this is actually a very nice condensed sort of event, which is really kind of, that definitely beats having 9 different events. I mean, having your code or your blocks being too redundant, I mean, of course, sometimes you're going to have no choice but to make it redundant. But if you have a chance to make it less redundant like this, it makes your program a lot more cleaner and easier to fix, easier to update it if needed. Let's go ahead and test this out. So I have to, of course, refresh the emulator. Let's try this again. Let's refresh it. For some reason, it doesn't want to refresh. Let's see. I think either way, though, whatever I wrote over here it's going to update, I believe, here. So if I do click on these, it should work. But I really want to have a fresh slate to begin with. So I may have to end this emulator and then sort of jump the video up a little bit. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and stop this video right here. Actually, I'm going to just not really stop. I'm going to sort of cut the video right now and jump ahead in this tutorial. Okay, so I skipped ahead. So now we have the emulator refreshed just like that. Let's go ahead and sort of test this out. So I'm going to first click on this button right here. Initially, our Boolean turn will be set to true initially. So I click over here, it will assign X to this block perfectly. Perfect. So now we see that okay, I want this thing to go away so I can show the code while doing this. Okay, so if I click over here now, it's gonna put a 0, an O right there, and it doesn't matter which button was clicked because each of these buttons are all going to run this block right here. And again, I hovered over, so now it's sort of blocking everything again. Okay, that's fine. So basically, it's going to run this entire block right here. I don't want to put the mouse over it, but it runs that whole block. Any button I click will run this block. I click over here. This button obviously is blank, and turn does contain false, so it's going to put a 0 there, or an O there, sorry, which it does. If I click over here, it'll put an X over there. So every time you click on button, and if it's not empty, it's going to essentially place an X or O there, and then sort of flip the Boolean, the turn from true to false or from false to true. But any button is going to trigger this one block, which is really kind of what we want it to do. So now we're going to actually add more components and go over actually functions and other blocks for MIT App Inventor, or for this Tic Tac Toe game. Okay, so every time you want to play or make a move on our game, every time we have to check to see if the game is over yet. So every time we click and we update an X or an O, we have to actually check if X won or O won, or if a tie happened. So we of course can put all of this into one block right there, but it can be beneficial to separate everything, because otherwise it can get a little complicated when you have a lot of nested blocks going on. So let's go ahead and create a procedure. I'm going to click on this. I'm going to call this procedure, let's see, check board. So it's going to check the tic-tac-toe board to see if the game is over and whatnot. So what we want it to do is if the game ends, I want to disable every button. So I'm going to make one more function actually, because I might call this function in several spots inside this function to disable all my buttons. So I'm going to create another function here, or sorry, a procedure, same idea, to disable every button. So I'm going to click on a button, and then let's see. Oops, wrong one. I'm going to set enabled. So let's see, set enabled, and then go ahead to my logic, false. I'm going to right click and duplicate this a few times. So I think I need 9 in total. It's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And do it for every single button. So I'm going to just make this easier on myself, just like that. So we set every button to disabled. Hopefully I didn't miss anything. Let me see. Looks like it's all good. Nothing is missed. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and just put this in this procedure. So I'm going to call this in several spots potentially. I mean, it's beneficial, so we may have to use this. I'm going to call this maybe just disable buttons is what I'll call this one. So this function, if I ever call it any spot in my program, it's going to automatically disable all my buttons. So I may use this in a few spots. And how do we actually call a function? Well, it's pretty simple. I'll first just call this function. Let me go ahead and see if I can refresh the screen. Of course, refreshing doesn't really work. I don't know why. Suddenly, okay, there it goes. So I'm going to actually just call this function in my program, just because. So I'm going to go ahead and say call disable buttons, and I'm going to call it in this function button click. So what will happen is when I click on this button click, it'll call this function disable buttons, and this function. So when we have a call disable buttons, it's going to run all the blocks in this disable buttons procedure. So when we want to call it, we just say we click on the call block, and it will just jump over here, and it will run these. Then it actually will go back. It's going to go back to where it was called from, and it will continue. So if I wanted to, I could actually add more blocks. It could, I'm not going to do anything. But I could actually have more content here. So this is just kind of blank. But anyway, if I go ahead and run this code, if I go ahead and do a call disable buttons, it will jump to this block, run all of this code, and it returns back, and it will continue from that block. So just FYI there. But anyway, let's see what happens if I do in fact call this. So I click on any button, it's going to set it to X, and then it's going to call this function disable buttons, which is going to disable all of them right away. So this function is kind of nifty because we can just constantly disable buttons just like that. So I'm going to go ahead and just sort of go over some of the logic as to how you want to implement this tic-tac-toe game. Okay, so this is not going to be the complete program because one thing I'm missing, just to recap from before, I'm not actually setting this label to player X's turn, player O's turn every time I make a move. So of course you can go ahead and inside these blocks here. So I'm going to remove this. I'm not going to call this function here in my program now, not right now at least. But anyway, so it's going to basically you want to set that label to say X's turn or O's turn, depending on which depending on whether turn contains true or false. And after you successfully click on a button and it was able to update X or O. So if let's say it was actually not empty, this button, then you don't want to flip this turn, and you don't want to actually modify the label at all. But that you can sort of on your own kind of work on that. So anyway, let's go over this checkboard function. So of course, this is going to get called inside of this button click, but we'll call it in a second. So basically, there's no real shortcut to doing this. So to check if the game is over, we have to check these three buttons if they all have a matching sort of text, but we have to make sure that they're not blank. If they all match and you're blank, then the game will say, oh, it's over because, well, all these texts were the same. So you have to make sure that at least one of them is not blank, and if all three of them match, then it's a win. And the same thing for this row, for that row, for this column, for that column, for that column, diagonal, or this diagonal right there, and then this diagonal. So yeah, and then of course also, if there's no winning combination, and every single box or button, sorry, its text is not blank, then it has to be a tie game. So you have to have all those cases, and there's no shortcut. So it's really a lot of if and else ifs you're gonna have to do. Let's first just go over, or probably just a lot of ifs actually. Let's first go over just the first example, the first case. So let's try this one out. So I want to check if the first row is a match, if all the elements match in that first row. Okay, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to say, well, I'm going to first check to make sure that the button is not blank. So since I'm going to check this first row, if as long as this button is not blank, it has an X or an O, then I can go ahead and check the rest. But this has to not be, this can't be actually a blank, or else there's no point even trying to check for this. So I'm going to have the following. I'm going to say VTN1, check its text field. So I think it should be here. There it is, like that. I want to first make sure if it's not empty. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the is empty, and then grab this not. So basically I'm checking if, so if the text, so R1C1, that top left button, if it's not empty, so this checks if it's empty, and then we're going to negate this. So we're going to use not operation on this. So if it's not empty, the text, okay, then I have to go ahead and check and make sure, well, do all three of those buttons in that first row match? Okay, let's go ahead and grab another text, another if sort of block over here. And I'm going to put this inside of this if, and I'm going to go ahead and check all of those. So here's sort of a little redundant work. So I'm going to have to grab the first button's text field. Let's go ahead and just copy and paste or drag this here. I'm going to duplicate this a couple of times. Just so I don't have to like keep going back to my blocks right there. So I'm going to have R1C2. So R1C1, R1C2, R1C3. It's going to be all the buttons on that first row. So I have to go ahead and compare them using my math block. Equals. So if R1C1, so top left block, equals, so essentially if this matches the text in this, that's what I'm first doing. Then I'll grab another comparison block, like this. So now if R1C1 equals R1C2 and R1C2 equals R1C3, then there's three elements in that top row that all match. Now I have to, of course, use the AND to combine these two together. So we first check if that R1C1, so row 1, column 1, if it was not empty, then we check, well, if R1C1, that text equals R1C2's text, and R1C2 equals R1C3, that means we have three elements in a row that match. So, of course, I'm going to go to my LBL message label, set the label, let's see, where is it? So it's hard to find these, there it is. I'm going to set it to, well, based on what's stored. So I'm going to grab not this if, but this puzzle piece if. I'm going to set it based on some condition. So I'm going to say, well, so since I actually swapped the turn right here, I'm going to have to sort of do a little bit of weird sort of logic right there. So I'm going to check this turn variable. So I'm going to say get turn. So basically, true is X and false is O, but we actually flipped it right there. So the last turn that was just recently made was, so let's say if it was X's turn, then it became 0, but the last turn we had actually was X, if that makes sense. So we had it was X's turn, right? We just clicked on a button, now it's O's turn, but the last turn was X. And if let's say after we click and it was X's turn, and then we have a match, then X had to have won the game, because X made the most recent move. So we flipped it to 0 because X made the move, but X was the last one that acted. So if this is true, then X had to have won. Hopefully that does make sense. So I'm going to actually reverse the logic a little bit here. In that case, I'm going to output X wins. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to say O wins. I'm going to set that label based on that. I'm going to move this over just a little bit so we can see all that. And then, of course, I'm going to call the function to disable all my buttons because we won the game. So procedure, call disable buttons. I'm going to then call that right here. So after we do all this, then it calls disable buttons like that. Let's go ahead and test this out. So I'm going to try to refresh the screen. Okay, so I kind of had a break in this video again because I forgot to actually call the function checkboard inside of this button click. So it refreshed, but we have to, of course, call checkboard. So I'm going to go to procedures and click on call checkboard. I'm going to go ahead and call that. So as soon as I click on a button, it will set it to X or O, and then it will flip the turn variable from true to false, and it will call this function checkboard, which will check to see if the game is over. So I'm going to just sort of make this work. So I'm going to have it where the top row will contain all X's. So let's go ahead and try this out. And then if I click on this, this should actually give me sort of a win. And it outputs X wins, and all the buttons are disabled. So it does check that first row for that. Now, of course, I could also make it if it's all O's on top would win. Let's go ahead and refresh this as well, just to check it for O's. It shouldn't make any difference actually, but let's just double check this. So you have to add several more cases. So you can go ahead and sort of copy and paste, these blocks. So this block over here, you can copy and paste that again and again for each case. Let's go ahead now and just do it where O is going to win. So O is up top. I'll put X over there. And then if I put O right there, it should win. O wins. So in this case, it doesn't really matter which one it is. We first check to make sure that this top left block or this button is not blank. If it's not blank, then we compare the text with this one with this and this one with this. If it's all true, then they all have to be the same. And whichever one it is, we output to label accordingly. We disable all the buttons afterwards. So of course you can also, so I guess for the lab, you're going to have to sort of add more sort of conditions. And of course, you could maybe even modify the view to add a button maybe to this program, which will enable all the buttons, and it will clear everything out so you can continue playing. But I just kind of kept that part out just for right now. But anyway, that is a tutorial for this tic-tac-toe game. So I guess that's basically it for right now. So till next time.